Could there be a dark horse candidate for the Denver Broncos defensive coordinator job? What's up, guys? Welcome to Denver Broncos Syndicate, part of the Sports Syndicate family of channels where we are dedicated to bringing you content about our favorite sports teams. I am your host, Gage Madrid. Before we jump in, guys, if you could just do me a favor and smash the like button on this video as well as subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate it. Again, those are two free and easy ways that you can help show your support for the channel. It helps tell the old YouTube algorithm to push this content out to fellow members of Broncos country just like you and me. So since the hiring of Sean Payton, the biggest topic of conversation amongst Broncos country is who is going to be the coordinators under him. As of right now, the top candidate for the Broncos defensive coordinator job is former Bears defensive coordinator and former Seattle Seahawks defensive assistant Sean Desai. Desai is someone who is from the Vic Fangio tree. He served as an assistant in Chicago under Fangio and then ultimately wasn't the direct successor to Fangio, but was the guy after him who replaced Chuck Pagano when Pagano retired. So he was the second successor to Fangio in Chicago. They both run a very similar 3-4 scheme that's predicated on a lot of zone coverage, a lot of cover 3, a lot of quarters coverage, a lot of quarter, half coverage or cover 6, a lot of those kind of principles. But as I've said many times on this channel, my biggest knocks on the Vic Fangio defense are the lack of blitz packages in obvious blitzing situations, as well as the lack of use of man coverage in situations where we have the horses to play man coverage, but you ultimately instead end up playing a soft zone. So those are some of my bigger qualms with the Vic Fangio scheme. Other top candidate for the Broncos defensive coordinator job was Brian Flores, former Miami Dolphins head coach and former Steelers linebackers coach, but he ended up taking the job as the Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator. Although Sean Desai currently figures to be the front runner for the job, there is one outside candidate that one NFL insider named that's actually not too far away from the Broncos' backyard. In his MMQB column, Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer floated around the idea of the Denver Broncos bringing in Mike Zimmer as their defensive coordinator. Now, Zimmer is currently poised to join Deion Sanders' staff over at the University of Colorado, but there is some ties to both Broncos head coach Sean Payton and general manager George Paton that could potentially make the Broncos job an intriguing one for Mike Zimmer. So here's what Breer had to say. Good on Denver for letting Evero pursue other opportunities. It seems as if Seattle assistant Sean Desai, an old Vic Fangio disciple, is well positioned for the Broncos job. But I've had multiple people wonder aloud to me if Payton might take a swing at luring Mike Zimmer, with whom he worked in Dallas, over to Denver from Boulder, where Zimmer is currently working for Deion Sanders. Now, just to clarify, Breer is not reporting that there is an official interest between the Broncos and Mike Zimmer, but there obviously are some connections that you could make that could potentially tie the strings together. As mentioned earlier, both Sean Payton and Mike Zimmer were on the staff with the Dallas Cowboys under Bill Parcells back in the 2000s, and so there is a connection there. And then also, George Paton and Mike Zimmer, of course, were in Minnesota together all those years. Payton was the assistant GM there, and then Zimmer, of course, was the head coach there from 2014 to 2021. So George Paton was in Minnesota for pretty much almost all of Mike Zimmer's tenure there, so they worked together on a pretty close basis almost every day. Now, things eventually soured for Mike Zimmer in Minnesota. The relationship between the players and him deteriorated, especially his relationship with Kirk Cousins, and it became clear that the relationship had run its course and it was time for both parties to move on. Zimmer served as an assistant under Deion Sanders at Jackson State last season. As of right now, Zimmer is poised to follow Deion Sanders over to Colorado. However, it's not exactly known what role it's going to be. It's not known if it will be as the defensive coordinator or as just a defensive assistant. That said, anytime you can have Mike Zimmer in the building, it would be a very valuable resource. Although Zimmer is poised to take that CU job, there is a chance that the Broncos could lure him in with all those connections as well as a potential promise of a defensive coordinator job. Now, if the Broncos were to get Mike Zimmer from Colorado, they would have to transition to a new base defensive scheme. Mike Zimmer is notorious for running a 4-3 defense, and that's a big shakeup for the Broncos because basically for as long as I can remember, the Broncos have run a 3-4 defense. I mean, dating well back to the John Fox days, I think the last time we ran a 4-3 defense was, I think, Jack Del Rio. So it's been a while since we've had a 4-3 defense here in Denver. When Wade Phillips came in, he implemented his 3-4 scheme, and then Vance Joseph kept a base 3-4, and then although Vic Fangio drastically changed the defense, his scheme is still a base 3-4, and the same thing obviously with Ejiro Evero. So going from a 3-4 to a 4-3 is going to be a big transition for the Broncos if they were to go in that direction. They'd have to get the personnel to run a 4-3 defense, and I'm not exactly sure if we have that kind of personnel in the building right now because we've been a 3-4 defense for all of these years. So I'm curious, Broncos country, how would you feel if the team were able to lure Mike Zimmer out of Boulder? Drop those comments down below. I would love to hear from you. Be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. And while you're at it, be sure to follow me on Twitter at Gage Madrid NFL for even more Broncos coverage. And for now, this has been another episode of Denver Broncos Syndicate. I am your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.